Hi, everybody. My first panel, we talked about the future of work. This panel, we're talking about very much the present of work and how to make it better. I first want to ask you the question I ask pretty much every entrepreneur that I have the pleasure to talk to, which is, if every great company is the answer to a great question, what is the question that your company was trying to answer, and how did you start it?
You know, it's actually like, what did I want to do with my time in life? That was it. It wasn't like this big, deep thing. It was like, I love to design stuff. I went to school. I majored in finance. I got a little bit of business background. I've always sort of felt myself as an entrepreneur. And what did I not want to do was actually part of it, which is I didn't want to go work for someone else. I didn't want to go work for a bank, which is where I thought I'd probably end up. The internet was happening as I got out of college. And so, like, what could I do with my time that I really enjoyed? That was it. So I never thought of a business as something I would start that would grow. It was just, what could I do with my time? And it turned out that it grew into something great, but I didn't think of it that way. So I'm different than many entrepreneurs who go at things with big ambitions and big goals. I don't even have any goals. I don't think that way.
Okay, well, what is Basecamp and how did it start?
Sure, so Basecamp, so we actually started a company back in 1999 called 37 Signals. That was the original name of the company. And we were a web design shop, so we were doing website redesigns for people who already had websites, but it was sort of the first generation. They wanted a better one around 1999 or so. So we were redesigning websites for clients, all sorts of different clients, and we needed a better way to manage the projects and the process of redesigning these sites. We also were just kind of using email at the time and phone calls and meetings, which is just chaotic and chaos. And we didn't feel like we were very professional in presenting our work to our clients. So we built a tool internally just to present work to clients and get their feedback on the record and this sort of thing, and manage the tasks that need to get done, and the schedules and the deadlines and all that kind of stuff. And we started using it with our clients, and they're like, what is this thing that you made? And we're like, it's just this thing, I don't know. You know, we didn't really know. And enough people started asking us, like the light bulb goes on, you're like, maybe there's a product here. So a few months later, we turned it into a product. This was in 2004. Way before software as a service was even a thing. Mm-hmm. We were one of the first to ever do it. And we put it out there on the market, and it turned out to be this really powerful thing that a lot of companies started to sign up for. And about a year later, it was making more money for us than our consulting work. So we stopped doing consulting. We've been focused on product ever since, and Basecamp as our top product.
It's interesting. So like the tool itself sort of became the product. The tool became the company.
The tool became the company. We even renamed the company to Basecamp a few years ago, because it's our biggest hit. There's millions of people around the world who use it, and hundreds of thousands of companies that pay for it. And it's all we do now. We don't do anything else. We just do Basecamp. And so for people who are small businesses who need to communicate internally and keep track of client work, know what's going on, who's doing what, who's accountable, it's more than just a communication platform. I actually don't like communication platforms because they solve this tiny slice of the problem. But when you run a small business, you have more than just communication problems. You got to keep track of who's doing what, who's accountable for what, when things are due. You need to make announcements that are not small things, but they're big things. You need to have shared file storage. There's a lot of other things that come into it. So Basecamp is sort of a one-stop shop now for small businesses to run on this particular platform.
It's interesting because I feel like one of the ironies of a lot of these communications technologies, like email, is that they are invented to solve a very specific problem, which is making sure that people can stay in touch with each other. But they inevitably create other problems, like being deluged with other people's emails. And it's funny because I think of an email sometimes as essentially a to-do assignment. When I'm sending somebody email, I am leaving a little to-do in their inbox. There's a lot that's being written about now about how this service is being overused because we're essentially just giving other people constant activities, constant things to do during the workday, so that ironically nothing actually gets accomplished between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m.
Yeah.
Do you sense this in the companies that you work with? That there's this growing frustration that people aren't actually accomplishing work during the workday itself?
Yeah, and email's an easy target, but I don't think that the email is the problem. I think the problem is that companies do not respect their employees' time and attention. They take it from them. They don't give it to them. I think if you ask people now, compared to 5 years ago, compared to 10 years ago, do you have more time and attention to do your work today? They would probably say no, I have less. So all these modern technologies that are they're supposed to revolutionize the way we communicate, and all they're doing is sucking more time away from us and more attention from us. And I think in order to do great work, you need to have uninterrupted stretches of time to do the work. And so you're right that when you write something to somebody, you got to think about the cost. I always try to think about, what does it cost me? Actually, let me step back for a second. You think about when people say attention, what do they say? They say, you pay attention, right? So I always think about paying, like what does it cost to take someone else's attention for the moment? So if I ask them a question, that wasn't a free question to ask. That made them stop doing what they were doing to now answer my question. So is what I'm asking you more important than what you are working on? Is a question I'm always trying to ask, and making sure that people in our company think about when they communicate. Because there's a lot of freewheeling communication going on where people are just interrupting each other all the time. That's very expensive when you start to think about what it really costs to pay the attention to someone else's simple, quick question. So it's a lot of problems. There's a lot of reasons for this, but I don't think it's getting better. And that's what kind of makes me nervous about where we're at right now.
Right. And so how specifically do you think the problem should be solved? Do you think that it falls to the individual to say, all right, I should essentially just not assign all this work constantly by sending email after email? Yeah. Or is it a technological problem with a technological solution?
I don't think it's a technological problem necessarily, or a solution. I think it's about setting the proper expectations of how a company works. So a lot of companies are, everyone's running around with their hair on fire. Everything is ASAP. If any question is asked, there's immediate expectation of a response. It doesn't matter what technology you use. If the human expectations are that, you're screwed anyway. You're just it doesn't matter if it's email or chat or whatever, it's bad, okay? So I think this is about more of a cultural shift in expectations. When I ask a question of somebody, I want them to get back to me when they're ready, not when I want the answer. Mm-hmm. There are very, 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 very few things that need to happen immediately, okay? But everything has become ASAP in real time, and I'm going to type something and I'm going to expect you to there's a notification that gets sent out. This one line at a time, and now I'm going to get an answer. It's this is a chaotic way of working. It's not sustainable. People are more and more anxious and tired at work today than they've ever been. So I think it's about the expectations, which is when questions are asked, for example, at our company, or people write stuff up, the expectation is people will get back to you when they're ready. If it's an emergency, a crisis, fine. Of course, I need an answer immediately, but that should happen once or twice a year.
Yeah.
You should not be in crisis mode all the time. And people are working in crisis mode all the time about things that are not important enough to cost that much attention.
Right. It's interesting because connecting this to the conversation we've been having for the last few hours here, this is an event about the future of work and then therefore also about the future of leisure. So, John Maynard Keynes predicted in the 1930s that we would have shorter work weeks, and that hasn't come to pass for a lot of Americans. In fact, for men who graduate from college, time use surveys find that they are working more than ever, and this is certainly true for women who have a much higher labor force participation rate now than they did 30 years ago. But at the same time, I also find that I call it leisure is a little bit leaky in a way, that at work I'm chatting with friends and doing things that I might typically do in leisure time, and then on my weekends, I'm still tethered electronically to my boss and all of my employees, and therefore I'm still kind of on the clock and feel a responsibility to make my weekends, to make my leisure time productive. Yeah. And so in a weird way, what used to be a solid boundary between the work week and the weekend has instead become this porous fabric where work is constantly at leisure and work are constantly flowing back and forth. Once again, do you think that this is the sort of thing where America or modernity just needs a modern timeout, that we need to re-erect the walls that used to stand between the working week and the weekend?
I think it's a terrible trend, what's going on. First of all, as an employer, I don't feel like I'm entitled to any more than 40 hours a week for my employees. That's enough. 40 hours a week is enough time to do great work if you have 40 hours a week to do the work. This is the problem, is that companies expect people to get a lot of work done, but they don't give them the time to do it and the time and attention to do it because they're constantly clawing at it with meetings and conference calls, and someone's tapping you on the shoulder, you're getting 12 notifications you got to follow up on. So people aren't actually able to work at work anymore, which is why they're working in life. They're working nights, and they're working
up
weekends.
At 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Going to, right, exactly.
It's a bad trend. So the way we look at it is 40 hours a week is enough, and so we have to change the way we work to make sure people have about 40 hours of their own time and very little company time. And one of the things we do, Basecamp is the only product in the world that does this right now. We have a feature in Basecamp 3, which is our latest version, called Work Can Wait, where every employee can set their own work schedule. So for example, mine is basically 9 to 5, Monday through Friday. Outside of those hours, Basecamp, the product, cannot send me a notification. I cannot hear from work at night. I cannot hear from work at the weekends. If I want to go in and check it out myself, I can do that. But nobody at work can get a hold of me on Saturday morning through Basecamp, which is what we use at work. If they want to call me, of course, they can do that. But I'm not going to be pulled back into work. Companies are really good at throwing out hooks and pulling people back. And I think a lot of modern communication technologies are getting better at this in the wrong way, which is they're constantly pulling you back. Notifications, you check it out, then there's another 7 things you haven't seen, then you kind of get into it. So we're trying to push back on that really hard and saying it's up to employees' personal time is theirs. It is not the company time, it's theirs. So give them walls that they can erect so they can't hear from work. But the thing is, that's important, is that the culture of the company has to be supportive of that. If I, as the boss or the owner, say, I need to be able to hear from people whenever I want to hear from them, then whatever this tool you're using isn't going to work. Like I have to believe that that's true, that I don't own or deserve. Own's actually totally the wrong word. I don't deserve, I'm not entitled to anyone's nights or weekends. And if that's the case, then we can function as good people, and people can have time off on the weekends and be good people.
You made a great analogy earlier. We were talking about work and sleep, and I'm just going to tee it up because I don't want to steal it from you.
Okay, cool. So it's funny, we all know what a good night's sleep looks like. It's one where you're not bothered and interrupted. You're not nudged every 15 minutes. Your partner isn't snoring. Like, it's just a good night's sleep. We all know what that looks like. But at work, we're constantly snoring. We're loud. We're interrupting each other, either through notifications or whatever it is, or meetings or conference calls or just loud office environments. And we have these small, tiny chunks of time to ourselves. And if you had that at night, you would go, there's no way that's a good night's sleep. So why do we consider that a good day's work? Like, we should not consider the current chunked up sort of tiny work moment days. We don't have work days, we have work moments now, and they're very short. And it doesn't add up to a good day's work for most people, just like a good night's sleep would not add up to that if you were being bothered all the time. So I think there's a really close relationship. Also, when you put your head down on the pillow at home, you're not instantly sleeping. You have to go to sleep. I think the same thing is true for work. You sit down at your desk or wherever you do, and you have to get into work. You can't you're not immediately productive. And so there's even these buffer zones between the time when you're working. This is the problem with meetings. I've got a lot of problem with meetings, but one of the biggest things is, like, if a meeting starts at 10, you're not really working up until 9:59. You've kind of stopped a little bit short, and when you get back to work, you're not instantly picking up where you left off. You have to get into it. So there are these, like, anything that chunks your day into smaller bits takes edges of that time as well. People don't have any time left.
No, I think that's a really important point, because
terrible.
a lot of times I think when people say, well, you had 4 hours to do this work between 1 and 5, even though you were booked solid until 1 and immediately after 5, that it's the proper analogy, and I'd never arrived at it until we were talking, is REM. That you don't tell someone, just get your REM, just go, just get it right now. They can't. They have to go to sleep, and then they take time, and then they fall into REM, and then maybe they bounce out of it, and then they go back into it. And then they need time to yet again come out of it before they're ready to engage with the world. And then you need similar buffers around sort of deep work, essentially.
Yeah, REM work. Let's just call it REM work.
REM work,
you know? Like, if you think about REM work, like, how often do you have REM work at work? I mean, most people would say,
it's a depressing question.
Yeah, it is a depressing question. If you ask people, when's the last time you had 3 hours to yourself at work? Truly to yourself. I bet you people would be like, I don't know. I can't remember. Maybe 3 years ago.
Yeah. And I do worry that to a certain extent, and this is speaking from personal experience, that one becomes encultured in the expectation that work should be moments. So that, for example, I feel myself needing to keep checking email, needing to keep checking Twitter and Facebook to see if there's some new news that's broken, some new information that I need to be able to deal with.
Yeah.
And so even when nothing is being asked of me anymore, I still feel I've developed the habit to keep checking if things are being asked for me. And so once again, it's the spillover effect of reaching out too much, is that people become too tethered to their inbox.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely an addiction, dopamine, and like all these things that happen when you go check your phone, you get something exciting for a moment, or you like something. Like, that's more of an epidemic, I think, that's just sort of reached into everything. And it's hard to break that. It's an addiction, and I think we all know how hard it is. Like, you don't have your phone for 3 hours, people freak out. Like, think about how bad it must be to be a heroin addict. You know what I mean? But it's not that far away. So yeah, I think it's a problem. It's a real problem, and you know, I don't know what's going to happen to change it. I actually think that part of the big problem is. This is probably, we only have a few minutes, so it's probably too deep of a thing to get into. But I think part of the reason why many products are based on these quick hits, basically, and you have to keep coming back, is that the fundamental business models behind many of them are based on views and time spent in products. I think I would hold it as a badge of dishonor to hear that people are spending 8 hours a day in Basecamp. Okay? Some companies think it's wonderful that people spend 8 hours a day in their product. To me, that is a terrible metric. Personally, I understand why it exists, but it's a bad metric, I think, because it's basically saying that the only way for us to make money is for people to spend a lot of time in what we do. And so what can we do to hook them in and get them even more addicted? It's like the only way cigarette companies sell more cigarettes is, have people be addicted to cigarettes, and they have to buy more packs, and the whole thing. It's the same thing with these products, a lot of these products. So I think there's some fundamental problems that the behavior will not change until the business models change, but I don't know when that's going to happen either.
Right. To that last point, I think of it sometimes like customer service. Like, a great customer service agency does not measure its quality based on time spent with the people who are calling in, right? It's not like, wow, people spent 10 billion hours with us last year. Well, that's a terrible thing, even if they were stuck inside of your customer service listening to Muzak.
Right.
So you can imagine how lots of different products, productivity products, could be measured by time saved rather than time spent. But speaking of time saved, I have to ask you before we go about telecommuting, because this is one of these issues that is on the cusp of some of the trends we've talked about today, and very much in line with how people work right now. Is this ability to be at home, be in another city, while simultaneously being in the office. Where do you come down on telecommuting?
We're big fans. So we have 50 people in our company spread across 35 cities around the world.
Are you guys sort of hub and spoke, or just fully distributed?
We have about 14 people in Chicago, and then the rest, about 36 or so, spread across 30 different cities around the world, mostly in the US, some in Canada, a few in Europe, one in Hong Kong, 2 in Australia. So we've grown up this way. My business partner lived in Denmark for the first 6 years we started working together, basically. So we're very comfortable with that. I'm a big fan of it for a variety of reasons. I think it's flat out just respectful of people, because what I don't like is that people's lives have to be tethered to a physical location because that's where their company is. We had Kristen, who runs our customer service team. It's silly, right? Kristen, who runs our customer service team, she started in Chicago. Her and her boyfriend wanted to move to Portland, Oregon, so they did. They didn't lose their job, and we didn't lose her. That's how it should be. Why should someone have to make a choice between work and life? Unless, of course, it's a physical job where there's, you're working in a restaurant, like you can't do that remotely, right? But information work can happen anywhere. I'm a huge fan of it. I believe we wrote a book about it called Remote. So if you want to know what we think about it, go read Remote. It's called Remote Office Not Required. So I'm a huge fan. I believe it's a great thing. It's not for everybody. There's some cultural shifts that have to take place. It's not easy for a company who hasn't worked remotely for years to then hire the first remote employee. That's probably not the right way to do it. But I think new companies can begin to hire remotely. Also, if you're an existing company, a great way to play with it is to say 1 day a month. Just 1 day a month. The third Thursday of the month, just everyone gets to work from home. Just try that 1 day. Just give that a shot and see how that goes, and then build some confidence. See, it's a great idea, I think.
And one of the positive side effects of having telecommuting is you have a lot less meetings, I find.
We have no meetings at our company. But the other thing that's great about it is, for an employer, for those here who are entrepreneurs, is that if you want to hire the best people in the world, the chance that they're within a 20-mile radius of where your office is based is very unlikely. Like, I'd rather have the whole world to hire from. So we hire wonderful people from all over the world who are fantastic at their job. We pay them US rates. It's not a money-saving thing. It costs us more, in fact. But I'd rather have the pick of the world than the pick of 20 miles.
Right.
So it's great as an employer as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's all we have time for, but thank you all very much.
Thank you. It's fun, man.